In this short series, we're going to be breaking down some of the essential and basic HR concepts which form the workplace relations foundation for businesses across Australia. Today, we're going to be unpacking the topic of maximum weekly hours. In other words, we're going to provide you with some considerations when making decisions on how many hours your employees can work before you have to pay overtime. The Fair Work Act outlines that employees must not be required to work in excess of 38 hours per week unless the additional hours are reasonable. Some of the factors determining whether or not overtime is reasonable include any risk to health and safety. For example, requiring 10 hours per week might be reasonable for one employee who lives nearby the office, but requiring 10 hours of an employee that lives 2.5 hours away from the office may not be reasonable. Or alternatively, requiring 10 hours of overtime in a single day rather than spread across the work week may also not be reasonable. Consideration of the employee's personal circumstances such as family responsibilities. It may not be reasonable to expect a single parent to work overtime, for example. The needs of the workplace or enterprise. For example, during COVID, it might have been reasonable for nurses to be expected to perform additional overtime due to the strain on the medical system and the vital nature of the work being performed. The level of remuneration. For example, it would be reasonable to expect overtime if the employee has a salary that's very close to the minimums required by the award if they're not being paid additional for the overtime. Notice given by the employer of the requirement to work overtime. For example, in the scenario of a single parent, it may have been reasonable to expect a few hours of overtime if they were provided with a few weeks' notice of the overtime being required. Notice given by the employee to refuse to work overtime. For example, perhaps the employee let the employer know that they had an event to attend a few days before the overtime was being required. It may then be unreasonable to ask them to work overtime in these circumstances. The usual patterns of work in the industry. For example, trades almost always work overtime versus call center types of roles, which rarely perform overtime. And finally, the nature of the employee's role and their level of responsibility. For example, it's more reasonable to ask a senior manager to work overtime compared to a more junior employee. Some awards also have averaging provisions in relation to the maximum ordinary hours. Otherwise, you may look to enter into a voluntary averaging agreement with your employee as well. So as you can see, there's a multitude of factors that need to be taken into account when making an assessment as to the reasonableness of requests for additional working hours. And unfortunately, there's no black and white answer.
Does your business have a HR or workplace relations issue? Are you unsure how to work through compliance issues but still achieve a good business outcome? Why not take advantage of On Demand HR's free 30-minute online consultation with an experienced HR consultant? At the end of the consultation, we also provide you with a strategic action plan to resolve your current issues. To see the types of matters we can help you with and schedule your consultation, please visit ondemandhr.com.au/advice. We look forward to delivering certainty, confidence, and clarity for your business in your HR and workplace relations affairs.